This year, Formula One has entered an exciting new generation because the sport's regulations have changed. But why? Why do we even have regulations? Come to that, what even is a regulation? Let's break it all down. Put simply, a regulation is a rule or a directive put in place by Formula One's governing body, the FIA, which collectively controls how the sport is run. Every sport has the rules which define it. In some, like rugby or cricket, they're called the laws of the game. But in Formula One, they're known as the regulations or the regs, and they set the terms for everything from how many wheels the cars have to the podium ceremony, the size of the trophies, and even the post-race press conferences. Sorry, Tom Clarkson, your name isn't in the rule book. To cover all aspects of the sport, the regulations are split up into 5 separate categories. The first category is my favorite, the technical regulations. This is the set of rules that dictates how the cars are designed, built, and operated. The technical regulations document is hundreds of pages long and sets the parameters within which the teams are allowed to work when developing and racing their cars. The second rule book is the sporting regulations. These govern how race weekends are run, the distances of the Grand Prix, the awarding of points, as well as things like the rules around testing, protests, and indeed appeals, and the number of power units and gearboxes the drivers can use each season. Thirdly, since the budget cap was introduced in 2021, Formula One has financial regulations as well, and this restricts the amount of money that each team can spend every single year, and in some cases, how they can spend it. And lastly, we have the operational and related regulations, the newest of the rule books. These cover things like the team's mandatory 2-summer shutdown and the registration with the FIA of key team personnel like the team principal, the sporting director, and the race engineers. The FI publish all of these documents in full on their website, so you can download them and have a read of them if you're a budding F1 designer. So, why do we have all of these regulations? Why not just say the teams could do whatever they like, build whatever kind of car they like, and may the best team and driver win? It would sound fun, but motor racing is a very technical sport, and when the early enthusiasts got together and decided to create the FIA Formula One World Championship, they also thought it would be a good idea to set some ground rules to make sure it was fair and competitive. The initial set of rules that they came up with stipulated the size of the engines the competitors could use, and that first set of regulations was the formula of the new World Championship, which is how Formula One got its name. Ensuring that the sport is fair and competitive is still really one of the primary functions of the Formula One regulations to this day. It's not just my own entertainment. It simply wouldn't be an entertaining or exciting sporting contest if the teams all arrived at each Grand Prix with wildly different cars capable of very different speeds, even though it might sound exciting. So, the regulations are really there to provide a framework within which the teams can operate and compete on equal terms. The regulations, though, are incredibly detailed in modern Formula One, but they also serve to ensure that the sport maintains its identity. For example, they dictate that the teams must all build their own cars, hence why they're officially known as constructors, and that the cars must be open-wheeled and open cockpit. That is the nature of the sport. What is a regulation cycle? Well, it's nothing to do with the Tour de France or any other cycling contest you care to name. Of course, the current rules governing the sport are very, very different to the first set of regulations adopted back in the first season of Formula One in 1950, or even those from 1970 or 1980 or 1990 or even 2010. So why do the rules keep changing? Well, there's 4 main reasons: safety, cost, road relevance, and to encourage more exciting racing. And I reckon you probably care about the fourth of those most of all. The first F1 regulations were primarily concerned with engine size, but as the F1 designers and engineers found more and more innovative ways to make their cars faster, the regulations had to evolve with them, with pioneering thinkers like Colin Chapman, Gordon Murray, and Adrian Newey constantly pushing the boundaries of car design. Well, the evolution of the regs to keep up with new technology and new ideas has been part of Formula One's DNA for decades. One of the biggest regulation changes came after the teams developed ground effect aerodynamics on their cars in the 1970s. But by the early 1980s, this technology had become so advanced it was producing massive amounts of downforce, which in turn led to massively increased cornering speeds. The rulemakers decided to step in for safety reasons, and the ground effect era came to an end in 1982, forcing the team to design brand new cars for the following years. Following a completely different concept, the teams began to look to their engine suppliers to help make the difference in terms of performance. And the manufacturers responded by building ever more powerful and even more expensive turbocharged engines capable of delivering over 1,000 brake horsepower. Once again, though, it was decided that the cars were becoming way too powerful and indeed much too fast to be safe. So the regulations were changed to remove turbochargers from Formula One in 1989. In the early 1990s, digital technology arrived in the sport, and Williams spearheaded the development of electronic aids with Alan Frost's 1993 title-winning FW-26 featuring traction control, anti-lock brakes, active suspension, and many other driver aids. And this car is often cited as one of the most technologically advanced machines of any Formula One era. And it brought huge success for both Frost and Williams and forced the other teams to start developing their own equivalent systems in response. But for 1994, the FIA wanted to put the focus back on the drivers as much as possible. So the regulations were again changed and electronic driver aids were phased out. The next big change came for 1998, when the regulations were changed to improve overtaking and improve safety. And this was done by slowing the cars down in the corners, but also making them a little bit more tricky to drive. And to achieve this, grooved tires were introduced on all four corners of the car, and the cars were mandated to be a bit narrower, 20 cm narrower in fact than their predecessors. That change coincided with what often happens at the end of a regulation cycle and the beginning of the next, a shake-up of the competitive order. As I know personally, because I was there at the time, up to 1997, Williams had won 5 of the previous 6 Constructors' Championships, but in 1998, their dominant run came to an end as the McLaren team leapfrogged them, and everybody else to claim both titles that year. And they were unstoppable. The same thing happened again in 2009, very famously, when sweeping new aerodynamic regulations were brought in aimed at increasing overtaking opportunities for the drivers. Out went those grooved tires to be replaced by conventional slick tires to give the cars more grip, while the aerodynamic rules were given a massive overhaul to try to limit how much speed the drivers would lose while following the cars ahead. The bodywork was massively simplified, and the result was that the 2009-era cars looked radically different from the 2008 machines, with much cleaner bodywork devoid of all of those complex curves and bits and flicks, and winglets with tall, narrow rear wings as well. And what followed was perhaps the biggest surprise and the biggest shake-up in the pecking order that has ever been seen in Formula One. Previous front-runners like Ferrari, McLaren and Renault saw their advantage wiped out completely, while upstart teams like Red Bull Racing and, most surprisingly of all, the Brawn GP team surged forwards. In fact, Russ Brawn's team famously completed a championship double in their first and only year of existence before the team became Mercedes for 2010. And it was that same team that really benefited from the beginning of the next regulation cycle in 2014 when it was decided to revamp the engine rules. In Formula, manufacturers are always keen to use their relentless innovation to help drive forward technical advances in the sport that they can use in their road cars. And with an increasing focus on road relevance, Formula One rulemakers decided to replace the two 4.4L naturally aspirated V8 engines with smaller, more efficient 1.6L V6 engines, and these engines were turbocharged for the first time since the 1980s. And they were also hybrids. Mercedes had been working really hard on these complex, new power units, and they really hit the ground running, wrapping up both titles in 2014 as they began the most dominant run in Formula One history. The pecking order was then again shaken up in 2022 when another previously banned technology was brought back into the sport, ground effect. This time Red Bull and Ferrari seized the opportunity presented by a set of new rules, and they managed to steal a march on all of their rivals. Though it was Adrian's Red Bull design team who continued to find more speed than the rest within the same regulations, and they pulled away from Ferrari and took over as Formula One's most dominant force, particularly with Max Verstappen at the wheel. Actually, that rules reset followed a year after another huge change was introduced to Formula One, which involved the creation of another entirely new set of regulations. However, this time those new regulations wasn't about the car design or the wings or the tires. It was about money and how that money was spent. Any form of motorsport is an expensive business, and over the years, the FIA has introduced various regulations to try to keep the costs down. For example, they limited the number of engines the teams can use over a season. But in 2021, for the first time ever, and after years of being proposed, F1 finally brought in a cost cap, restricting how much money each team could spend per year. This was a major change for the sport. Suddenly, every single dollar of expenditure had to be accounted for by the team, aside from a few exclusions like driver salaries, marketing budgets, and the costs of each team's 3 highest paid personnel. So if you employ Adrian Newey, well, that's one of them. And that rule change has fundamentally altered the way that the teams and in fact the whole sport are run, while also making it more financially sustainable to go racing in Formula One. So here we are at the big reset. Cadillac has joined the fray. Ford has returned to Formula One in partnership with Red Bull. Sora has become Audi, and Honda has joined forces with Aston Martin. The new cars are smaller, lighter, and more agile. They also have a shorter wheelbases than the previous generation of cars, and they are narrower overall, and this makes them more nimble, and it should encourage closer wheel-to-wheel racing on track. The drivers will also have new active aerodynamics. Corner mode will give the drivers more downforce to help them take the turns faster, while straight mode will see the drivers open the flaps on the front and rear wings to give them less drag and more speed when chasing down their rivals and trying to pass. A new boost feature will give the drivers maximum power from the battery and the engine, which they can then use to attack or defend anywhere on the lap so long as they have enough charge in the battery. And drivers who are within a second of the car in front will also have an overtake mode, which will give them an extra burst of power at top speed to help them make a pass. To power these two features, the drivers will have to harvest energy from braking and the engine to recharge the battery throughout the lap, adding a fascinating tactical element to every race, and different drivers are going to deal with this quite differently. These new super-efficient hybrid power units will run on advanced, sustainable fuels. They'll have triple the electric motor power compared to the previous generation of power unit and an even split between the internal combustion engine and electrical performance. F1 has never stopped evolving, and it never will. Change is in the DNA of the sport. Drivers, team personnel, the circuits on the calendar, and of course, the cars themselves all change from year to year. The regulations evolve, too, to keep F1 technically relevant and keep it safe, and to ensure that the racing is as exciting as possible. Each rules reset presents a new challenge to the top technical minds and drivers in the sport, but it's also a chance for a different team to shine. We'll find out who's mastered the 2026 rules the best when the cars hit the track in Melbourne for the first Grand Prix of Formula One's next generation.